It's time for another edition of Lewis at Large, 60 minutes of smart talk radio featuring guests from all walks of life in conversation with your host, Warner Lewis. So sit back and lend us your ears for the next hour. Now here with today's first guest is the host of Lewis at Large, Warner Lewis.
Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck, and of course that means some smart talk radio is in your future. And this segment, a subject that we will revisit. We have visited it before, but this particular segment, we'll take it from a little bit different angle. Should be a good one. We'll be talking to Jeanne Beard. She has decades of experience in the trenches with Asperger's syndrome and the autism spectrum overall, and people diagnosed as such. She was mentored by clinical expert Timothy Wahlberg during the writing of his clinical guide, Finding the Gray, Understanding and Thriving the Black and White World of Autism and Asperger's. She is a devoted mother of two sons, one diagnosed with Asperger's himself, and also with one with ADHD. She's a grad at Northwestern University and Dale Carnegie training. She's a successful vice president of sales for Chicago-based printing company with a 25-year tenure, and our friend indeed. Jeanne, how are you, my friend?
I'm wonderful, thank you. How are you today, Warner?
Well, we're good. You've got a brand new work called Autism and the Rest of Us, How to Sustain a Healthy, Functional, and Satisfying Relationship with a Person on the Autism Spectrum. Obviously very personal to you, but what inspired the actual writing of a book?
Well, I'm really excited about sharing the information with people. After working with Dr. Wahlberg to write his book, I realized that I had a very unique perspective. I had been given tons and tons of clinical information, and I could put that together with my personal experience. And that was really powerful because it enabled me to understand my personal experience and to put it into words for other people. Because my book is really about the rest of us. There is some information about autism, and there's information about what might be happening with that person, but a lot of it is about how does that impact us? How do we feel? How do we react? And what can we do to make a better relationship, to create a better relationship with this person who's dealing with the autism in their life?
We have had clinicians on before. We've even had a few parents on before that are in this same kind of situation. But I'm curious as to, is there a moment, and I don't know whether it's an official diagnosis or over time, what happens to parents when they hear this diagnosis of a child? Take us through that.
The first person I ever heard speak on Asperger's syndrome commented very tongue-in-cheek. She said, when we diagnose the child, we should medicate the parent. If that gives you any idea of how the parents react, I think that it is a crisis. When it happens in your own family, it happens to your own child, it's a crisis. All of a sudden, this baby, this child or infant or however old they are, my son in his case was 10, that you love so much and you have hopes and dreams. And, I went into my parenting saying, I'm going to be the best mom ever. I'm really going to be, great mom and help this kid reach his potential. And you hear the word autism and suddenly all the question marks arise. What is his potential? Will he be able to live alone? Will he be able to manage a life? Are things going to get worse? Are things going to get better? What kind of problems is he going to face? Will he ever be able to sustain a life on his own? And if he can't, what do I do as a parent? How do I protect him, after I'm gone? I mean, there's huge, huge impact on a parent when they understand for the first time that their child is autistic.
Jeanne, autism is a gigantic word with a gigantic definition covering a wide spectrum. Is that a fair statement? And if it is, what do we need to do to kind of burrow into it more and know some of the different, I don't know whether the word is phylum or not, but the different breakdowns? Because it seems to me like it's a sort of a catch-all word. Is that right?
Yeah, and it seems to be getting more that way. In 2013, when the diagnostic manual DSM-5 came out, they eliminated the diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome. And Asperger's syndrome was something that people were starting to get their heads around as a diagnosis, and to understand that was on the autistic spectrum, but that these people are very bright and very high functioning and are probably going to be in the mainstream world, but they're going to have certain types of issues. And so we were starting to get our head around what Asperger's syndrome is, and then the diagnostic manual kind of wiped that out, and they lumped everybody back under autism spectrum disorder. So it is autism and ASD, autism spectrum disorder, are sort of general terms for complex, they consider it a brain developmental disorder. It's not a disease, it's a brain developmental disorder. And there's a number of factors that are really important in determining the functioning of the individual. One is their IQ. People, the old stereotype in your head is the child in the corner who's rocking and drooling and can't carry on a conversation and isn't engaging with the world. And that is an old stereotype that I think a lot of us fight against because people don't know any better. People who haven't had autism in their lives don't know any better. But that could be related primarily to IQ, lower IQ. Some people never speak. Some people can never be left alone. They're self-injurious. That's sort of the extreme end of it, where Asperger's syndrome, the kids that were diagnosed or people who are Asperger's, would be on the very high end of the spectrum where they're functioning relatively normally. I would say if you lined up 20 kids and 3 of them had Asperger's, you probably wouldn't know which ones they were until you asked them to do something. And then it would be the task. It would be the way they executed the task that would sort of tell the tale.
You're listening to Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis from the Flight Deck and, of course, Smart Talk Radio. We are in the midst of right now. We're talking to Jeanne Beard. She is first and foremost a mother. She is also a successful vice president of sales for Chicago-based printing company. But she is the mother of 2 children, one with Asperger's syndrome, the other with ADHD. We're talking about a brand new work that she has put together called Autism and the Rest of Us. Jeanne, let's talk about the child that is in the autism spectrum. How does that in fact change the parenting role at all in a material way? Does it change the role and the dynamics with siblings? Share with our audience a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. Absolutely. Having someone in your family that's on the spectrum changes everything. It's not for the siblings. It's not unlike having a child with any other disability. The individual with a disability tends to get extra attention, tends to get, different, has different expectations of them. And there are times when my other son feels like that's unfair. And I understand that. I think that's a dilemma that every family that has a child with a disability faces. It's not really that different with autism than with other disabilities. As far as parenting goes, it's totally different. It's a totally different experience. I cannot expect my son on the spectrum to understand the social implications of things the way I expect my son who's not on the spectrum to understand them. So if I want to teach my son to brush his teeth, my socially based son, I can say to him, if you don't brush your teeth, you're going to have bad breath, and then people won't want to talk to you. And that's all it takes for him to get the message. My Asperger's son wouldn't relate to that social context. He needed, and he did finally learn to brush his teeth, but it wasn't until he had a series of painful dental surgery that he realized that not taking care of his teeth meant that he would, have problems in the dentist office. So it is a very different experience. A lot of the rules that apply to parenting a child not on the spectrum are, if they're different, and they're also much more, it needs to be much more repetitive. You need to do the same thing and tell them the same thing over and over and over again before they understand, if they ever really really understand the message that you're trying to teach them.
What if we take it outside the family? What, because you are, I assume, a very sensitive person and have a high degree of awareness at a lot of levels. I'm curious as to the reaction or the vibe, so to speak, you picked up from your friends from a social perspective, maybe those that you work with, when they are aware of the situation with your child. is their relationship with you? Does it change in any way, shape, or form?
Well, I think that depends on the relationship. I've had some of my close friends who have been much more compassionate and understanding of my parenting dilemma than, they've become more compassionate when they've understood the kind of difficulties I've faced. In a more open environment, in a more less formal or less close environment with someone who I don't know as well, I would say that they don't know what to make of it. So most of them don't even go there. They don't address it. They don't ask about it. I think people are afraid to ask because they don't want to be offensive. They don't want to take me into a conversation that is too personal.
Right. What about, and again, all of this is framed that autism, so to speak, again, is this sort of catch-all phrase that encompasses many spectrums, many levels of depth, etc. But just in general, from what you've seen, how good are we at to say the public school system? Tell us about mainstreaming there, the ability to do that, the ability to not do that, and how well do the public schools handle the spectrum of autism from where you sit?
Well, I think, I live in Illinois, and in the state of Illinois, we're not long on funds these days. I think I think the schools do the best they can. They have a tough job. They have to balance the needs of 30 children in a classroom with one child that has special needs. And so they really do the best they can to manage that balance. And it really depends on the child. If the child is very disruptive in the classroom, then they have to address it differently than if the child just simply can't get to class with a pencil. My son was never disruptive in the classroom, but he had difficulty. He didn't want to write anything down. He didn't take notes. He couldn't remember that he had homework. And so he had other kind of executive functioning related issues that made it difficult for him. And this, I'm in a terrific school district, and the school district here did have some special support available for him. I think that some districts are better than others. It depends on what kind of funding they have for special needs kids. I will tell you that as a general rule, teachers want the kids to fit in, and they want them to be like the other kids. So a teacher that doesn't understand ASD, autism, and has a child in their classroom is going to be more likely to wonder why the heck this child can't just sit down and be like everybody else. And so educating teachers and EMTs and policemen, that's part of my mission. I really hope that I can help people understand exactly what's going on with this child on the spectrum so that they can be more effective.
I know one of the big reasons, again, you mentioned earlier that you sort of got involved in writing this book is to help spread the word, to break down some barriers and to be part of this pool of information and understanding that seems to be growing. Give us a grade, A being perfect, F being horrific. Where are we in our society? And let's just limit this to North America for right now, in terms of our understanding, our sensitivity, and our just sort of grasp of what autism, what it means, and dealing with it in a positive, proactive way.
Well, improving every day. We're improving every day. If I was going to give a grade, there are people, of course, that would get an A. There are a lot of people that would get an F. And I think as a culture, as a society, we're probably somewhere in the D's. An interesting fact is, depending on what website you look at, there's between 1.6 and 2.8 million people in wheelchairs in the United States. Well, if 1 in 68 children, CDC says 1 in 68 children's on the spectrum, 1 in 68 extrapolated to 311 million Americans is 4.5 million people. So that means roughly there's twice as many people with autism, twice as many people on the autistic spectrum in the United States as there are in wheelchairs. And look at the accommodations we have for people in wheelchairs. You can't go into a bathroom or a parking lot or any public place without seeing some accommodation. I think that if we're going to get an A ever in accommodating people with autism, we're going to need to begin to develop some types of public accommodations and to develop the understanding that you can't have a social disability without having a social network. If we can adjust the social network just a little bit, maybe we can make room for these people to live more comfortably, so they can be more comfortable in their own skin and be true to who they are, instead of trying to force fit them into the culture, the way, the rigid social structure that we have today. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It does completely. Let me take you into an area that may not, well, I'm sure you have some awareness of it. And again, what you say I thought was significant. Again, this is not a disease. It is a developmental issue. But with that in mind, how are we doing on again, I'll call it either the treatment, so to speak, medical side of this, in terms of understanding it, dealing with it, new methods to make things even more proactive and more sort of, I hate to say life of normalcy. That sounds so sort of pedestrian, but you know what I'm talking about. How are we doing on that front?
Sure. Well, I spoke with Dr. Wahlberg the other day, and he reminded me again, there's no magic bullet. His position, and of course the position that has become familiar to me is that there's no cure, and there probably won't be a cure. It's really about adapting and learning to play the cards that you were dealt in the best possible way. So whether, there are some medications that are being used, but the medications primarily treat things like anxiety and the ADD type symptoms. They're not really treating the autism. They're not really changing the autism. They're helping the individual to manage some of the stressors that come along with trying to be autistic in a non-autistic society. So as far as what is being developed, for me, the cause and the cure issue is a little bit like focusing on what started the fire while the building's burning down. I'm really worried about what can I do today to make my life better, to make my son's life better, to make the people who I come in contact with who are on the spectrum, how can I understand them and work with them or handle the relationship with them so that we all live a better life. That's really where I'm focusing.
Again, we're with Jeanne Beard here on Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis from the Flight Deck here, and we're talking about a brand new work called Autism and the rest of us, how to sustain a healthy, functional, and satisfying relationship with a person on the autism spectrum. She is in private business in her own right, but she does have 2 children, one with Asperger's, one with ADHD. What about, as you look forward, look down the road a little bit, you obviously, the way you speak anyway, is very optimistic about the future. Tell us what your concerns are from a uniquely personal point, if you can, about your particular situation, about your son, and tell us about his future and what do you see down the road.
I'm very, very hopeful for his future. In many ways, because of the therapy and the intervention he's had, he is a more mature and more self-aware individual than a lot of 19-year-old kids. A lot of them really don't have much self-awareness at all, and my son really does have quite a bit. I am very, very hopeful. He's in college. Very hopeful that he will finish his degree. Like most 19-year-olds, he doesn't know what he wants to do with his life. He doesn't really know where he's going to end up, and that can be very discomforting for him. He can be very uncomfortable with the fact that he really doesn't know where he's headed. But I keep trying to reassure him that at 19, most people don't. And so I hope that he'll finish college and go on to have, a career and a family. He loves kids. He loves having a family. He loves being at home. And I think if you asked him, he might even say he wanted to be a stay-at-home dad. That was one of the last things I heard him say he would really like to do. But I'm very hopeful for his future, and I think there's every reason to believe that he can achieve all of those things. His ideal world may look different than what we as a society would expect. Maybe, we think a house in the suburbs, a nice car to drive, you have, 3 kids and a dog, and that may not, you go on vacation to Florida or you travel around a little bit. That may not be his ideal world. His world may be very much smaller, and I don't mean that in a negative way. His world may not include some of those things, and that's okay. He may be comfortable with living in a small house and having less responsibility in other areas and having a simple life and not traveling a great deal out of his local area. And all of those things are okay. I want him to be functional, and my goal for him is to be self-sustaining. Because as a parent, of course, my biggest fear is if he's not self-sustaining, what will happen to him when I'm not here to take care of him? So I think those are some of the big issues that parents face. And actually, that's what I'm focusing on for my next book is, beyond high school and into adulthood, how do we cope with the issues that we face? And some of them are not easy issues. The financial issue is very difficult, especially in states where there is not a lot of funds for special needs housing and that kind of thing.
Right. What about as we start to wind down here? I would like to help us out here, leave us with this, is when we think of autism going forward after listening to Jeanne Beard speak, how should we rearrange our thinking? How should we think about it, and how should we stop thinking about it? What are some things we should stop thinking from the past?
Well, I would hope that as people learn more about autism, they will stop thinking that the person who they're dealing with, who might appear rude or angry or dismissive or frustrated or grumpy or spacey, whatever negative thing they're experiencing, that they might realize that there's a very real reason for that could be related to their brain neurology, and they're not just jerks. I think that if we can suspend our social expectations long enough to realize that the brain neurology of this person is in direct correlation with their behavior, and that they're just not geared for social behavior, then we can begin to respect them for who they are and the way they are, and get beyond the things that we find offensive to get to the real person underneath the autism. And, a lot of these people are wonderful, loving, kind, warm, generous, wonderful people, but the autism shows first. And so our social nature reacts and says, you're mean, I'm not going to talk to you. And instead of getting past that, we write the person off. So my real hope is that books like mine will help people become aware of the neurological difficulty and how it impacts their behavior, so that we can begin to not excuse it, but at least to understand it, and at least to accept it, and at least to check our expectations at the door, if you will.
Well, we appreciate you being on. The work is called Autism and the Rest of Us, How to Sustain a Healthy, Functional, and Satisfying Relationship with a Person on the Autism Spectrum. The author is Jeanne Beard. Again, she's in private business, but she is a parent of someone that they have Asperger's syndrome in the family, and it is an extraordinary work. It's extraordinarily personal, and yet with some tremendous observations. Jeanne, how can people get a copy of the book and also find out a little bit more on the subject of autism?
Well, there's tons of resources online. I do have a website, which is autismandtherestofus.com. And the book will be available on Amazon on April 2nd, which is World Autism Awareness Day. So and my email address is in the book. I'd love to hear from people. I'd love to hear your stories, your successes, your frustrations. I really want to begin to build a wiki of experience so we can all share.
So are you now forever an author, or are you going back to, quote, private business?
Well, we'll see. Right now I'm doing both. I need to continue to take care of my family, but if I can find the means to take on this mission on a full-time basis, I would love that.
All right. Well, thank you again so much for being on with us today, and best of luck to you and the family in the future.
Thank you, Warner. Appreciate you having me.
You bet. We'll be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.